Hey, what's up, guys? This is Ricky V, and you're listening to episode number 7 of the Vintage Muscle Times. And now in this one, I have a special guest. My special guest for this episode is Dr. Todd Lee. Dr. Todd Lee has a bachelor's in biochemistry and psychology, a master's in neuropsychopharmacology. He's a doctor of medicine. He's an APF regional champion powerlifter, 6-time state champion, 3-time national champion bodybuilder, and the IFBB pro bodybuilder. And today he's coming on to help us all make some more gains, shed some fat, and really, really build that physique we're all looking for. How are you doing today, doctor?
Doing great, man. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. So you just finished your workout, huh? We're communicating as we're coming in.
I hit a push today.
Push. What does that entail? How are you doing those?
So I start with a little bit of cardio, and I use the Cybex Arc, which got the moving arms, so I can get blood flow to the chest and shoulders and back. It's almost like a warm-up. Then I'll go do some stretching, and I do side planks, which really gets a good amount of blood flow to my shoulders to do side planks because of supporting my body. We went with the side planks. Then I go do cable lateral raises because I get to work the stretch position, high reps. Then I move on to Y raises with the cable, and then I move on to reverse pec deck, but I do it thumbs up with the scapula tracted so I can really get the middle delts. Then I turn around and do some pec deck just to warm up my pecs. Then I move on to my first real exercise, which is the incline Smith machine. And I work an 8 to 10 rep range for 2 sets, basically right there. Work set, back off set. Move on to a decline press. Then I move on to doing some tricep stuff. I do a dip machine, and then I use the Vulcan cables that you might have seen Ian Valieri use at the Raw Revive Gym videos. And I do 3 sets down and then 3 sets overhead with the Vulcans. And that's pretty much my push 1 routine.
So on push day, you're working out the chest, the front of the deltoid and tricep, basically, right?
For me, I start with middle delt because I prioritize. I always put my most important body part for the day first. So for me, middle delts is more important than pecs. So I do middle delts first. And I've found that because middle delts aren't really involved in pressing, that they don't really get in the way. You could put middle delts at the beginning of chest. You could put middle delts at the beginning of pull. You could put middle delts at the beginning of legs. That middle delts can be put on every day of the week if you want, assuming that they recover in time. So middle delts are like one of those special body parts that is a really important show muscle for creating the V taper or the X frame if you're physique or bodybuilding, and it has no negative influence on almost any of your training that day.
Yeah, I noticed middle delts are big scoring part for bodybuilders. A lot of guys tend to overdo the synthol on the delts to try to bring them out, and then they look funny as hell at these shows. But yeah, the middle delt definitely gives that whole shape, and he breaks your arm apart. Yep. This weekend, who do you think's got the best middle delt going up on the Olympia stage this weekend?
Well, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that Hadi Chupan is shooting the synthol into his middle delts, and he got in trouble for triangle delts. I don't know that Hani endorses site enhancement. I find that most people use their delts as an injection site because it's easy and there's nothing, you can't fuck it up. And some inflammation there will be helpful. Whether they're using SEOs or that's just their injection site, that's another story entirely. As far as the best delts go, that's a tough one because I can't think of anybody up there that has dominating delts. As like Steve Kuklo isn't doing the show. He's known for his delts. Ian's delts tend to dominate over his chest. Big Rami's got amazing delts going into this. It really complements his frame dramatically. But I mean, nobody up there's going to have bad delts. And nobody up there's going to have bad delts, and everyone's going to have good delts. I'm excited to see. I mean, we got by far the best lineup in history. I mean, there's never been a lineup like this. I would say at least 15 of the 10 guys would have beaten Phil 3 years ago when he got third. Might have even beaten him when he won in 2018. that this, in just 3 years, the sport's launched into probably its most impressive it's ever been. In 2019, when Brandon Curry won, people kind of said that was a weak year. So we went from 2019 being one of the weakest lineups in Olympian history to 2022 being the most impressive lineup in history. And that if Ronnie Coleman was still here, people would think this is sacrilege. I don't know that Ronnie Coleman could beat Big Ramy or even Nick Walker.
Big Ramy's a specimen. I mean, we've never seen anyone like him on stage, have we?
No, but I think Nick Walker's package this year is going to blow away his last year's appearance. I think that Hunter's going to be a little better. I think Bonak's going to be a lot better. I think Hottie's going to be a little better. I think Brandon's going to be a little better. I think Ramy's going to be a lot better. But I think Nick will be almost another species, just like how he evolved from 2020 to 2021. I think that we'll see another evolution of that magnitude this year and next year. I think the 2023 Nick Walker is almost guaranteed to be Mr. Olympia.
Well, we're only a couple of days away, so we'll see how your predictions hold up next week. We'll make sure to visit on the next podcast as well. So how long have you had your pro card for now?
It'd be like 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. 2 years, October 20. No, it was September 2020. So over 2 years.
Where for a professional bodybuilder, where does the physique jump the fence from being, amateur, top level amateur to now, okay, this guy is a pro? I mean, besides winning, obviously you're winning, but what would you say would be the main difference between a top pro or a high level amateur, where it really, it's the difference is what really turns you pro?
Presentation. If it's your stage, and it's that je ne quoi, it's that unexplainable feature. It's like you're so comfortable up there that you're yourself one day a year, and you feel uncomfortable 364 days a year. That the only time you're you is when you're on stage. And that's when you're comfortable. It's not like you're nervous and not like you're excited. It's that you're finally home. Because if you're at home on stage and everyone else is nervous, they're painful to look at, you're comfortable to look at. So you're going to draw the eye. If you take your time and you get in that pose when you're damn good and ready, if you're on the beat with whatever house music they're playing, whether it's Gloria Estefan or Billie Eilish or whatever the fuck the music man's playing, you know every song so well that you can nail it as if you choreographed that song. Like, and obviously, like usually with men's bodybuilding, they put on more aggressive music. So the lightest thing you're going to have up there is Led Zeppelin. You're not going to have Billie Eilish. If you're a bodybuilder posing, sometimes you see some of the black dudes posing to R&B and they make it all like sensual and shit. But for the most part, they don't do that to us unless we choose that. It's usually rock music. And if you know every song, I mean, and every song enough to where you have a rhythm and a beat and you can nail your poses, and everybody else is just on your stage for the day, but it's been your stage. It will be your stage. It'll always be your stage. And it's like, then they know you've got what it takes to go to the next level. I mean, as an amateur, you're always in a weight class unless you're super heavyweight. So they know they're never going to see you at your best because you sucked out 5, 10, or 15 pounds of water to make it that day, to compete against other people in the driest, hardest look you can bring. That once the gloves are off, you can just swell up and get to a bigger size. Or if you can't, you transfer laterally to classic, since the classic cutoff is higher for the pros than it is for the amateurs. But presentation is the difference. This was indicated with both the critiques of Michael Krizo and Andrew Jack, that both of them are estimated top 10 Olympians, even though they just turned pro a couple months ago. That we're having freaks hitting the scene that are Olympia ready as amateurs for the first time in history, year after year after year, whether there was Nick Walker made it to the Olympia his rookie year, Hunter Labrada made it to the Olympia his rookie year. Now we're getting people like Andrew Jack and Michael Krizo who are making the Olympia within a few months of even doing their first show. Never in the history. Normally it takes 20 years. Now it's taking 20 weeks. The thing that
what do
they're
you think
missing,
contributes to it? What do you think contributes to that?
well, what everyone's saying is missing is presentation. Even if they're in their pose correctly, their transitions and their stage presence is shit. And I'm not saying that Michael Krizo and Andrew Jack's presence is shit. I'm saying that this is the critique other experts have said about these individuals. Before I can say someone's stage presence is good or bad, I have to be there in person. You can't pick up stage presence off of a camera. There's no way to watch a video and get charisma. Charisma has to be in person. Confidence is something you feel. It's not something you see. You have to be in their presence. That's why I call it stage presence. If you're in their presence, it's like this is a supernatural being. That whether they were born a god or whether they channeled an avatar of a god, this is not a mortal man in front of me. This is a supernatural being, and I have the opportunity to bask in their glory while they achieve victory. And it's a special moment. And then everyone else on stage next to them is just there to highlight and exalt their magnificence. That there's never a contest, really. Usually there's one person that just owns that fucking stage.
Yeah, interesting. When you said presentation, I the first thing that hit my mind was that as you season as a pro and you do show after show, you get much better dialing in your preparation, dialing in your physique for that day. But now you also are talking about basically stage presentation, being comfortable out there, knowing your moves, having watched enough film and put photos back to see how you look best. That's real interesting. What do you
might have two poses. You might have two poses where you look best. So like you hit option A for the rear double bicep, and you can see the silhouette of the person next to you is hitting option A for option B for that rear double bicep. So you hit your option B for that rear double bicep. You're like, oh, you're gonna play this card. I'm gonna show that's my second best version. My second best is still better than your first best. Like they're gonna hit a cocked leg and a shifted hip front double bicep. All right, I'll mirror them so that they can compare apples to apples and see I've got a runner apple. That you've got a worm in your apple. There's no worms in this apple. You know, it's like
and posing is always it's an art. Who is that? Dorian Yates. People would say, hey, his triceps aren't that great, but gosh darn it, he make them look good on stage. You know, just the posing, there's so many intricacies and small fine points to posing that could really be the difference between you getting all the points and getting nothing, right?
It's kind of like, imagine a basketball player who has a shot coach, a dribbling coach, a layup coach, a dunking coach, a three-point shot coach, that's never played a basketball game or played 4 games his whole life. The dude who's played 150, 200 games is going to murder him. It doesn't matter if he's not as good at shooting, not as good at dribbling, not as good at layups, not as good at 3-point shots. It's like you can practice the subcomponents, but if you don't actually do the game, you know, that's why I think that somebody who is going to do a show, if you can do crossovers and multiple age classes, if you can be on stage 36 times that weekend versus on stage 3 times, do it. You just got 12 times as much practice on stage. Because you can only get stage presence by being on stage. You can't get stage presence being backstage. You can't be stage presence in the gym. Posing in your bathroom isn't the same thing.
You brought something up, and this is something that I've discussed on other podcasts as well. You're saying there are guys that are really getting up to the higher levels a lot quicker than before. And I've always had several conversations with even guys old school in the bodybuilding game who would say, hey, the reason guys have gotten so much bigger from the 70s, 80s, 90s, it's the evolution of the drugs, even the introduction of readily available anti-estrogen compounds in the late 90s and early 2000s made it so that guys could even take more aromatizing compounds, and then they could bring down estrogen. That, along with the fact that every kid nowadays can view the world through their phone. So maybe back in the days, you had to know someone who's into bodybuilding to even step into the first gym, but now someone can actually find that interest on their phone. So we get guys that are better genetically for that sport, that event, that having a chance to taste it, to see it now, where before we couldn't. Those are kind of my theories on it. Why do you think? Why do you think bodybuilders look so much better now? They keep getting better every 10 years. We have these guys keep looking, like you said, like super beings. And why do you think some guys are progressing faster than ever before?
All right, let's break it up into periods. All right, so the first period was pre-pumping iron. That with the pumping iron mainstreaming bodybuilding and Arnold being in Conan the Barbarian in 1982, that transitional zone when Arnold wasn't involved, we basically lost bodybuilding to a free-for-all because there was no actual king. For the first time ever, you didn't have a reigning king. You had a battle of every year. It's a different Mr. Olympia for about 3 or 4 years. Then we hit the era of Lee Haney, where we still had symmetry and mass as a combined thing. Then growth hormone and Tren hit the scene, and you get Dorian Yates. And Dorian Yates redefined size with the growth hormone and conditioning with Tren. Since that time, there has been no evolution of gear. People claim there has not been an evolution of gear. There's been change in practice of its use, but there is no bigger, harder, better bodybuilders now than there was in 30 years ago. What's different is symmetry is now achievable while maintaining that much size, while having that level of conditioning. That Ronnie Coleman in 97 was 300 pounds on stage at 1% body fat. No one's ever been that heavy or that lean since then. So there's been no evolution in the science. There's been no evolution in the gear. The people who say that don't understand gear. What's different is the training. Rather than doing deadlifts and free weight squats and free weight bench press like an imbecile, they're not doing powerlifting nonsense with free weights. They're using machines designed by bodybuilders for bodybuilders that are now in their 3rd generation, and that are designed specifically to bring up individual body parts while putting the body through the least amount of fatigue. That's why in 2016, we saw the biggest transition. There really wasn't an improvement from 97 to 2016. But when Arnold said to Rolly Winklar that your bubble gut is disgusting and broke Raleigh's heart, and these changed the way that the Olympia was graded, and they started classic physique and its attention, and the fact that more people were interested in being into classic and women were more attracted to classic than open bodybuilding, it put a pressure on open bodybuilding to decrease the waist size. So of not nutrition, but gastric intestinal health and digestion were a bigger priority. The supplements about digestion, the use of fruits and vegetables, registered dietitians who are also bodybuilders like Chris Tuttle were now, and Evan Sinapani, who's kind of his friend, were the mainstay as for what proper nutrition was. And the use of machines to isolate the back muscles, not just work the whole fucking body and hope for the best. And so now we've had this transition to where the open bodybuilders have the same basic symmetry quality as the classic guys. You have absurdly small waists. Half of them can do vacuums. Nobody's doing from the floor deadlifts. Nobody's doing barbell squats. Nobody's doing barbell bench press anymore. It's all machines. It's all targeting the specific muscles that the men and the women are training almost identical. Whereas people are like abduction machines, adduction machines, glute bridges, those are for bikini girls. Now men are doing that stuff too if they need to bring up their inner legs, if they need to bring up the shape of their glutes. There is nothing that is too feminine for a bodybuilder to do. And likewise, nobody's ego lifting at this point. 2 years ago, even Ian would be incline benching 500 pounds for 8 reps. He doesn't do that at all anymore because his chest wasn't growing, his shoulders and triceps were. Even Bumstead was doing incline barbell pressing with 3 plates because Ian was his coach, and that's what Ian would do. I don't think I've seen Chris touch an incline barbell in years. Certainly, if he does, it's a Smith machine. And the same thing with the deadlifts. Ian and Chris were the last people on earth to do from the floor deadlifts. And then Ian admitted his glutes got too big, his back didn't grow, and he dropped them entirely this year. And he brought his back and his hamstrings up to match his glutes by not doing any deadlifts. Same thing with Chris. The year, I think it was 2020, when Chris's back had the biggest improvements, everyone's like, what did you do? He's like, I stopped doing deadlifts. I stopped doing bent rows. I stopped doing the shit that doesn't work, and I targeted the lats with cables. The way that Brandon Curry was doing it when he brought up his back from what Abdullah taught him in Kuwait. You know, everyone's like, well, they in oxygen gym in Kuwait, it must be gear, gear, gear. That's what they're doing. They're blasting them with gear. That's why they win. It's like, no, it is a camp. You go from your apartment to the gym, you lift, you go back to your apartment. You're not allowed to leave. Girls come in, they give you your shots. You don't know what it's in them. They provide you your food. You have no control over your diet. You have no option to cheat on your diet because there's no food. It's brought to you. You have no option of overdoing gear. It's brought to you. They're doing the injections. You don't even get to pick where the shots go. You have no, if you leave, you have escorts that are other men to prevent you from getting involved with women, which would distract you from bodybuilding. So your social activity is going out to eat kibbe and kebab and shawarma with a bunch of other dudes, and you have a community of friends, but you're all same-sex friends. You're not allowed to hang out with women. And that prevents drama from derailing you because, you know, women might be great, but there's probably a lot more women that are toxic in America than there are good women. So if you're going to roll the dice, there's only so many combinations that come up 7 and 11. All the rest of the combinations come up snake eyes. So with this, they've eliminated all the bullshit that your coach is with you when you train in Kuwait, and someone loads and unloads your plates for you. That's what made Rami. Rami literally shows up, does what he's told, and leaves. And then when he gets home, which is in the same building, his food's there and his gear's already there. He didn't have to do shit. And that's what works. That's why Brandon will leave his wife and kids in Tennessee and fly out to Kuwait and spend 6 months a year there. I mean, it sucks, but that's the way it works. So the level of commitment is so much higher. You know, in the 1970s, what did they do? They'd go out and they'd have pancakes and eggs. They didn't weigh a goddamn thing. They put butter on food. They'd go to the beach to tan. They're letting ultraviolet A beams touch their skin. They swim in the ocean for cardio. They fucking had no idea what they're doing. And they're stacking Deca and D-ball like asshats. So out of the whole planet, you got like 15 people that looked equivalent to what would be now a state champion. Not a single one of those people that won the Olympia in pumping iron would turn pro today. Not even close. They wouldn't even, yeah. So it's a whole nother
conditioning on stage.
No hamstrings, no glutes. There weren't shredded glutes until 1982 with Rich Gasperi. So nobody knew what the fuck they're doing. Nobody was working this hard. Nobody just dedicating their life to it. Now we've got people like me, medical doctors who review blood work to be able to help people choose their gear cycles based off of receptor mapping. And then there's the DNA profiling to determine what your diet's supposed to be, whether you should be on fat or carbs for cutting, whether you should be on how much carbs and how little fat for bulking, whether you're going to respond to growth hormone, whether you should circumvent growth hormone and just go right for IGF-1, timing of this shit. No one did any of this shit 5 years ago. No one ever did this shit 3 years ago. So that's why every year in bodybuilding, the bodybuilders are looking 10 years of progress. There's been more progress between 2020 and 2022 on that Olympia stage than there was between 1997 and 2017.
Incredible. Yeah, you're right. I see it. Absolutely. So it definitely is not all the gear or the addition of new compounds. It's less gear. It's less gear. It's less the best
compounds.
Gear for the person.
It's going to be Test, Primo, Anavar, GH. That's your off season. It's going to be test, Masteron or Primo, Anavar, and a tiny amount of trend to cut. People were using 500 to 1,000 trend. People are down to using 50 to 100 trend in just 2 years. That yeah, I would say the J3 University course has completely changed the way that everybody is doing gear protocols so that they're safer use models. And John has one on the record and said that he learned a lot from Victor Black, although he refined it and made it specific to bodybuilding, whereas Victor's models were based off of biohacking, not bodybuilding. And that there is a group of British coaches that Victor claims stole his ideas. They were his students that then went on to then market his ideas, but specific for bodybuilding. They broke them down, made them more salient, made them more rational, a way of doing it that didn't give him credit. John Jewett is the only person who gave Victor credit. So the biggest change, I would say, in the last 3 years with gear is a decrease in gear and an elimination of bullshit. That it used to be 1,000 to 1,200 tests with some anti-estrogens. You'd run some EQ. You'd run 300, 500, 1,000, maybe even 1,500 tren. All that shit's gone. Nobody's doing that anymore.
I was on the forums in the early late 90s, 2000s. I was a kid, and we were just guys used to use less gear, 70s and 80s and 90s, it seems like. Then when the internet exploded and you had actual steroid dealers telling people what they should take, is when you saw guys on these forums saying, oh, you got to take 1,000 milligrams of testosterone as your base. And then you built your cycle on that. And I think a lot of that shit got out of hand because a lot of drug dealers that now got a chance to speak to their customers and present themselves as knowledgeable folks, and the doses just exploded. I mean, all from 2000 on until the early teens, 20,000 teens, guys were literally doing 1,000 milligrams of testosterone a week just to get started for a guy that was never going to step on stage.
Right. And my experience was, I came into the game in 2009, which was the height of the ignorancy. This is when people literally didn't know that the numbers on the beef was how much percentage fat was in them. That this was the dumbest period of bodybuilding history because the internet was full power, but the education level was so bad. The bodybuilders were so bad when it came to nutrition and so ignorant about muscle hypertrophy. There was no studies on growing muscle. There was no studies on bodybuilding. There were no doctors who were bodybuilders conducting experiments on bodybuilders to determine, natural or otherwise. There's no Brad Schoenfeld. There's no Andy Gelpin. There is no Eric Helms. There is no experts in the whole world. There is just bro science, and then there was real science. And real science had no concept that there was even a field of bro science. They didn't even know bodybuilders really existed because it was the lowest point in the sport's history. There was no bikini. There's no physique. So it had just became, the people went from the Ronnie Coleman era, and it just went even more outlandish, more extreme from there. No one was fucking interested in it. It was the lowest attendance, I think, in history was 2008.
1999, I used to read T Nation, and we had guys arguing whether vet grade was really that much worse than human grade gear, because that's all there was. Turn forward to 2009, at that point when you were saying you entered the whole industry, at that time there were a ton of pro hormones over the counter that were still legal, and most, if not all, of the human grade gear that you can get was very scarce. At that point, all of the underground labs were huge. British Dragon was everywhere, and now
that was that stage in 2004.
British Dragon.
Yeah, I think British Dragon in Thailand was bust in 2004.
2004, 2005 was Gear Grinder, and that was Dan Cal out of Mexico. That was Operation Gear Grinder. Gear Grinder was 2005 Mexico.
So what's funny is, where I was going with this is, you had the peak of the forums. That the internet was so available, everyone had a cell phone that now had internet ability. And so you have the easiest access to the forums. And to me, the forums are the worst place you could possibly learn anything, because you have people who are anonymous who are trying to show off how much they know. There's a bunch of biohackers that probably look like a slug that are telling people how much gear to use. It was completely not credible at all. And that you also brought up, you think that why is it that there's people like Andrew Jack? Why is there people like Michael Krizo just exploding their first show, they're 300 pounds? I think that the benefit of the internet is that through YouTube, which didn't start really ramping up. In 2014, I started talking about gear on YouTube. I started talking about pro hormones, the 1-andro, the 4-andro, because they were the only ones legal left, because I conducted some studies in 2011 proving they were safe. And they didn't get banned. They're the only pro hormones that didn't get banned in 2014, the DACA Act of December of 2014. And then I started doing videos 2015. Then Rich Piana started doing videos about gear. And then everyone started talking about gear on the internet after I started it, but I wasn't big. Rich Piano was very big. And then there was the Dylan Gemellis, who are like people who look like they'd never touched gear in their life, but they're telling you all about how to do it. And he wasn't irresponsible. He just was thorough. He did his job. And so like, what's funny is that now ushers in a new era, because right around that time is when CBum got second at Classic Physique, the first Olympia. And now we start the CBum era. Now we have someone who's statuesque, picture perfect model with a perfect physique, who's wholesome and humble with a lisp, so that he's got social anxiety. He's an introvert. So every introvert boy on the planet can identify with CBum. You now have all these videos on your phone that'll teach you how to safely use steroids. CBum uses a minimal amount of steroids, not because he's judgmental, but because he's got a kidney disease, and he still is the world champion.